up, musicologists? Welcome to Amari Music Talk. I'm Richard Cole. Today has got to be one of the hardest episodes I have ever had to do. Probably one of the most difficult. As we know, October 14th, we lost D'Angelo, one of the great artists of this generation or previous generation, however you want to call it. But an artist that in a lot of ways has touched the lives of millions, has changed the face of black music. Some say restored it to the heights that it once had. So many great things. Even as I'm taping this episode tonight, they had the funeral services for him today. Like I said, this is probably one of the hardest. Because when I started this show, it was mainly a Prince podcast. And I started it long after Prince's passing. Before April 21st of 2016, there were other Prince podcasts that I listened to, enjoyed, probably caught a lot of them often, regular. But then after April 21st, 2016, I really kind of started honing in, exposed to even more different podcasts and things of that nature. And primarily, a lot of those have been major influences on what I do. So by the time I started this show, really, I think all of my processing about Prince, I've had quite, 3 years to kind of sort through that and kind of work it out. So by the time I started this show, I was in a pretty good place to really, talk about it. But with D'Angelo, that's one, again, I hold in the highest regard. With D'Angelo being a huge Star Wars fan, and the whole thing with the Yoda figures, which is a name that they've given to a lot of the greats like Prince, Marvin Gaye, Al Green, Jimi Hendrix, etc. I thought this was fitting to title this episode The Last Jedi. And I think in a lot of ways, he's definitely that last Jedi. Now, everybody has a favorite artist or, especially like one like D'Angelo who, have some mainstream success, but was, like a Prince, like Sly and the Family Stone, was always looking forward or keeping a certain amount of integrity, where, there are other artists in that ilk. I'll touch on neo soul and why I also dislike that title of a genre. But to me, those artists are what I call craftsmen, which means, their stuff, they're signed to a label. They may, in some ways, have conformed to the whims of the label. Like, okay, well, that's a great song. Okay, we're labeling this thing neo soul now, but this is accessible for radio, and you're aiming for that audience. Like I said, I'll touch on that a little bit later. But like I said, to me, I'd say yes, he's definitely the last Jedi. And with this being so fresh, and as this is unfolding in real time, it was a shock. I mean, that's one that was a definite shocker. Just like Prince. But two different reasons. I mean, with Prince, that's a different story and probably a different topic for another day. But with something like cancer that affects all of us, in one way, shape, or form. It affects all of us. Just that sudden shock. And, for somebody like me that was born in 66, you have D'Angelo that was born in 74. When you see somebody younger like that and succumb to something like that, it's pretty rough. But I don't know. The day of, I was on the Freakopotamus podcast with the real Russell, and was able to share a lot of my thoughts on D'Angelo there. I'll put a link in the description for that show. But this show, since I had not done a show in a long time, was in the process of planning one. The part 2 for the Fans Aren't Listening series. And just, like I said, just trying to process all of this and just life itself in general for me as well. It was just kept putting it off. So here I am. So I thought it was fitting just to kind of do a tribute to D'Angelo with this episode. Talk about his career. Also, too, I guess I'm kind of glad I waited this long. Just a few days ago, Questlove broke his silence on D'Angelo and, wrote some very moving words to that, too. So I wanted to hear that and process that before I decided to tackle this episode finally. But let's just go ahead and just dive in. I guess probably just first impressions. Let's go back in time to 1995. And I don't know if any of you those that do remember will know what I'm talking about. Those that are a little bit younger may not be aware of this, but kind of in this post MTV era, like around the early 90s, early to mid to late 90s, there was this thing called a video jukebox, and their frequency was on a lot of UHF frequencies. For those who remember what those are, before fiber optic cable and satellite and streaming, there was UHF, which is basically the frequency that your network stations didn't run on. I forgot what that frequency was. AHF, I think it was. But you had your ABC, NBC, CBS. Those were like the main frequencies all over. But your local stations, your independent stations that didn't broadcast NBC, ABC, or CBS, they were on that UHF frequency. So, like I said, for those that don't remember or weren't around yet, here in this area at the time before, and this is, before Fox or whatever, but when I was a kid, it was Channel 30 and Channel 11. By the time we get to the 1990s, there was Channel 46 here, and that was the station that was carrying for a while the video jukebox. And it was this thing, they played videos like MTV, but unlike MTV, you could call this 900 number, and you paid like whatever it was, 50 cents a minute, or forget what the price was, and you could request videos. And this channel, it was notorious, like all the Two Live Crew / Luke records, before what was that BET had trying to compete, would come on late, and that's where you would get like all the booty shaking videos and stuff like that. But the jukebox, that was their primary thing. But I mean, they also had stuff that was hot, that was rock, country. But yeah, it was mostly hip hop, mostly R&B. But like I said, it was kind of the more, quote unquote adult type music videos that were being requested. Um, uh, all the Dr. Dre, Easy E videos at that time, the Chronic stuff Easy E was doing, all of that was big around that time for those that weren't around for this. But there was a video that was, and you know how this video starts. It's a boy in the elevator, and here's this old dude. He's talking old dude stuff, and they get off the elevator, and it switches to D on the keyboards, and you hear those opening notes of Brown Sugar, and I was kind of like, okay, it was different from the moment you noticed it. It was different than anything right off the bat. And I really, I recognized that part of it. I thought it was very clever what was going on, but I didn't quite know how to take it. I didn't quite know what to make of this. I'm like, okay, well, he looks like a rapper, but he's not rapping. I mean, he's singing, but it's not really singing. The beat's kind of hip hop, but it's not hip hop. It's got something going on, and it's like I didn't quite know what to make of it at first, but I knew it was different. But the more the video was in rotation, the more I kept hearing it on radio. I was like, okay, yeah, I like this. I really like this. What's going on with this? And I think eventually, I don't know if it was anything else I heard from the album, but eventually, long story short, I ended up getting the album. First, I had it on cassette. Eventually, I got it on CD. And when I got the album, that's when it all clicked. That's when this clicked. I'm going to get into, musicians. I'm going to get into music snobbery, but especially amongst musicians. Our job, we don't listen to music objectively. I haven't listened to a song objectively since probably 1986. I had kind of written songs before then, but it was really then. And me and a friend of mine, we really started, writing songs, or at least, we started writing together first off. We wanted to be like Black John Lennon, Paul McCartney, or the next Jam and Lewis or whatever, like everybody in that period. We were all striving to be that thing, that next thing or whatever. And like I said, when you kind of get into that musicianship, when you get into songwriting, how you listen to music, there's nothing wrong with it. It's subjective. What you like, I might not like, vice versa. But I don't hear this, if I'm listening to anything, whether it's, up until a certain point as a kid, but even though I'm looking back, studying now, there's a point that anything after 1986, I'm dissecting it. I'm taking it apart like, oh, that's what the bass is doing. Oh, that's what the background vocals are doing. Oh, they use that chord structure here. Oh, they chose to arrange it this way. That's what I hear. Or it might be something like, oh, I think I could write something better than that. Or, damn it, I wish I wrote that. That's how I listen to music. And that's how a lot of musicians, songwriters, etc., we tend to listen to music in those terms. So we're more judgmental of stuff, or if we gravitate towards something, what the radio is telling you should like is probably 9 times out of 10 the stuff is like, oh, that's some bull right there. That's going to be here today, gone tomorrow. This became sort of not only the musician's album, but I mean, this changed everything. If you look at R&B at that particular time, to me, the Kings of the Hill were actually like Boyz II Men, Jodeci, and even though we don't mention R. Kelly anymore, Facts are Facts in the 90s, those were your top 3. Everybody else, now granted, everybody else were, again, I throw in either that craftsman category or I throw in the just blatantly imitation category. And again, it's not crapping on the songs you like. But again, as musicians, that's how we tend to think of things. It's like, here's the geniuses here. Either these are craftsmen, which means that they're doing this like it's like a job. It still sounds good, or it might be great songs or great albums or whatever. But that thing that makes Boys to Men what they were, what Jodeci was, what D'Angelo was, that's that ingredient that's missing. That's that key element that's missing. And kind of, like I said, we as songwriters or whatever, and especially if you have, you're writing with your best friend, like that. Like I said, if you study how John and Paul wrote songs or read interviews about their songwriting process or what they liked versus what they didn't like or what they respected versus what they didn't respect, every musician, regardless of genre, thinks in those terms. And this was the game changer. And having those conversations, we love Prince. And even in the 90s, even with the whole name change thing, it didn't shy me away from it. I know that period was just as interesting as his 80s period. But we also recognize that Prince's image, whether it was the hair, whether it was the clothes, it was the high heels, a lot of that, a lot of times really distracted from the genius. It distracted from his ability to get respect as a musician. Even to this day, I hate Rolling Stone lists now, the best album, best guitar player, best this, best that. And he's either way at the bottom of the list or nowhere on the list. And, I always used to say, damn, if there was a cat that, if he just dressed whatever, contemporary, but he kind of had that kind of, it doesn't have to be on that level, but even somewhere near that type of genius level, that would be a thing that would work. That would be the thing that music desperately needs, because you had where Jodeci was on the way out. R. Kelly was still hanging on and stuff, but, Boys to Men were kind of starting to fade out. And everything that was left were either the craftsmen or the blatant imitators, or just plain rubbish. That was all that was left. 1995, this surfaces, and that's exactly what this was. To me, this was like if Rakim was doing the Sign of the Times album. That's what this was. This was the game changer. Yeah, it was still kind of polished. If you read interviews with D'Angelo, where I think, it's like they were trying to match the level or the kind of the rawness from the demos. And some of it's there, but it's still a little bit polished compared to the gems that were coming out after that. And this was it. I think by the time I got to the last track, that's what I was convinced. Like I said, if Rakim was doing the Sign of the Times album, that's what this album would have been. And I think, just from the second track on, because like I said, Brown Sugar, I knew that one. But All Right, that's one of my favorites from it. Me and Those Dreaming Eyes of Mine, I think that's sort of my go-to. And then we got Shit, Damn, Motherfucker. You talk about bringing the blues, taking the blues, turning it, into like if Marvin Gaye did a blues song, but was recording it in Prince's studio in Paisley Park. That's what that track is to me. That's what this song is to me here. Smooth and When We Get By, I've always enjoyed those. There was a production crew that I was working with at one point, and I know kind of like those conversations, one of the cats in that production crew, they gravitated towards, I think Smooth, I think it was that one. But after that, I kind of started, when I started to revisit this album, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that is a gem. I mean, I knew it, but some things click with you later. You know it's good, but then 10 years later, you go, oh, that's really good. Wow. Lady working with the great Raphael Sadiq. It's like that's again one of my favorites from this. Higher. I think that was the thing that made me say this is, if you put Sign of the Times in a hip hop blender, I think this is an example of, and again, no slight to fans of the, Diamonds and Pearls or the Symbol album, but to be honest, if Prince was to have gravitated, it's like still be outside of that instead of trying to chase the trend or adapt to the trend. If he wanted to just infuse a hip hop element, not make it so polished like Diamonds and Pearls in the Love Symbol album or anything after, yeah, this would have been the way to go. And I don't think there would have been people that would have criticized the hip hop element in those two albums as much, or if at all, with that. But this was a game changer. After that, then we started getting Erykah Badu, and then that's we had Maxwell. I think Erykah Badu is another one. I think outside of that neo soul bubble, I think her and D'Angelo are those two artists that are in that vein of a Prince or any genius level artist that's like, nah, I'm going to do this album my way. Damn what the record company thinks. This is how I'm going to roll. And then, yeah, they have that hit album like Erykah Badu's first album. Then again, you had lesser artists trying to come in. And like I said, the craftsmen, I don't think that they're weak. I just think, like I said, they're just craftsmen songwriters. You sit there and it's like, oh, we need a song. And they can just sit down and kick out a song. But that element to consistently challenge oneself, like a Erykah Badu, like a D'Angelo, like Prince, like Stevie Wonder, like even on the other, like a Paul McCartney or something like that. That thing to challenge yourself and not just rest on your laurels or just fall back on that one formula. It's like, okay, Craftsman, yeah, we got the great song, but every other song now sounds like the first one you did, which was the better one, like that. And then, like I said, you got the flat out imitators, So, that's that in a nutshell with that. That's this genius level record. Changed the game. Like I said, D'Angelo's manager, which was also Erykah Badu's manager, also was the one that coined the term neo soul. And it's a term that D'Angelo has hated because there was nothing new about it. It was going back to the elements that made black music so great in the first place, that got lost in the shuffle of sampling, that got lost in the shuffle of Pro Tools, that got lost in the shuffle of record companies where the executives no longer give a damn about music. It's about, oh, that person came up with that style. Okay, we need 25 other artists to do that. Or where we are now, whatever, whoever the 5 hottest producers are, they're spread so thin against 75 other acts that, it used to be a joke when like older people would think, oh, this new music, it all sounds the same. No, there's a fundamental difference, in the artist, always has been. But now, yeah, every damn song sounds the same because it's one person spread out amongst 15 different artists like that. And it's not like they're producing. It's just like, oh, I got this beat, I got this hot beat, and you just throwing some words, or the artist is just throwing whatever words that are on top of it. There's no challenge to being an artist, at that stage, not in these days. And the ones that do, then they're lost in the shuffle of, they're lost in the shuffle of, well, they're on a streaming service somewhere and you got to go dig them up, or they're on YouTube somewhere and you got to go dig them up and find them, or you got to hope CBS Sunday mornings does a segment on it to make you aware, like, oh, that music exists. Cool. That's where we got to find them, because the record companies aren't checking for this stuff. Whatever, record companies, radio, whatever's left of radio is not checking for that. So their thing is they thought they could package D'Angelo or package that formula, that sound, and he wasn't having any of it. So we flash forward 5 years to the year 2000. In between that time, D'Angelo, he's having child with the great Angie Stone, who we lost earlier this year. And to me, that's another one, has been in the business for so long and deserves way more respect. There's an interview, I think it's on Vlad TV or something, but she breaks down how, like, the quote unquote powers that be, and I'm not going to trash D'Angelo, but he went along with it to a point, or he fell into it, or they got to him somehow, some way. But the way that they split those two apart, that's something to check out too. But her life in the music game deserves a lot more respect, and needs to be heard more. So their son Michael, condolences to you, brother. Condolences to Angie Stone's family, to D'Angelo's family. But I hope that all of their heirs are in the position to control the narrative and keep their names out there and keep their music out there. So even though they're not here, they will continue to get that respect long after we're not here. But in that interim, they had child, and he was kind of working on the next album, had a little bit of writer's block, and had heard two different things in regards to his son. The song Sea of Tranquility, which is on Kool and the Gang's first album, was one catalyst. Another catalyst was that he really got deep into this band called The Meters and realized that's the sound that he needed to go for. That kind of rawness, not so polished like the last album, not so keyboard oriented as the last album. He got with Questlove from The Roots, which is a fascinating story of how they got together. Questlove tells it in, like I said, his moving tribute. He's told it in other interviews that you can find on YouTube. There's interviews you can find on print as well. I urge you to go check out everything. But in that 5 years, them getting together, they go to Electric Lady Studios, which was built by Jimi Hendrix, and Stevie Wonder's classic period among many, 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 many great albums was recorded there. I did a review on the documentary and box set for Electric Lady, so I'm actually put that into at the end, so you can go click that and check that out if you haven't seen it. But they're there and they're trying to work on an album, but their approach has become one of the most fascinating approaches to recording an album. Anybody, Stevie Wonder, the Beatles, Jimmy, Frank Zappa, anybody, Funkadelic, Parliament. This, to me, was, like I said, those that are musicians, like I said, if you have like if you had the luxury to work with your best friend on music like that, where this is going. So they want to do an album, like I said, just like Brown Sugar, that's taking it back and bringing back some of the aesthetic, some of the quality, some of the, even a lot of the old equipment, to I guess, reincarnate a sound and a vibe that's organic and that's natural. They also had the great engineer, Russell Elvado, who has become probably one of my absolute favorite engineer now, because of the work he has done with D'Angelo and Erica and Common during this period. So, like I said, they're in Electric Ladyland. They're working on the album. Should have taken a couple of years to do, but in the midst of recording this album, they do some in-depth study of what they called the Yoda figures. You had a whole year they were studying Prince. A whole year they were studying James Brown and Fela Kuti. A whole year studying Al Green, Jimi Hendrix. A whole year studying, Sly and the Family Stone. Study. And they would start, watching, getting a hold of some bootleg videos or tripping off of some bootleg recordings from Prince or whatever, James Brown, whatever they can get their hands on. Stuff that you can now find all over YouTube. Actually, today I was watching some James Brown footage. Number one, James Brown estate. Please, if you have it, if there's not a rights issue, I need that 1974 Live in Zaire, the full concert. I did have the full audio of that concert. That's, 74 Mustache James. I need an official release of that. Please put that out. And there was one from 1968 in Paris that I was tripping off of earlier today. And, so here you got in the late 90s, D'Angelo, Questlove, Q-Tip, Erykah Badu, James Poyser, Charlie Hunter, Pino Palladino, all in the, studio. They're watching these clips and watch the clips. Then they jam, maybe play, if they're studying Prince one year, they playing a whole album, or they're playing the whole, up until that point, every Prince album put out, and just grooving and vibing. If they hit a little jam, where they're kind of going off and improvising, they hit on a groove like, hey, bring that tape back. And build a song off of that little whatever they came up with on spontaneity. And 5 years, then this album drops. I mean, Brown Sugar was already a game changer. This was definitely next level. And I don't think I knew. I know it was that. I'm like, where's the next D'Angelo album? Where's the next D'Angelo? Everybody's coming out with albums every couple of years. Prince still dropping stuff consistently. But it was like, damn, hope that wasn't it, but this comes out, and with all the subsequent interviews that was going on, this is where I sort of started following this artist kind of the way that I follow Prince, kind of the way that I follow the Beatles as a band and solo, James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder too, to where it's like, okay, I got to find everything I can possibly read about this. Any clip I could find, I got to watch it. I got to have it. Any bootlegs I got to have. This album kind of put D'Angelo in that sort of pantheon for me, in the, that my Jedi order, kind of put it in that level for me, or, to where, this is, if I would say if this isn't Jedi Master level, definitely the next album is going to get to that in just a minute. But yeah, this was a game changer and eagerly awaited. Again, this was something I think I bought the cassette first, got the CD later. I may have got the cassette and the CD the same day. I can't remember, but this was one that I bought, and this was in heavy rotation in the car, at home. And as I was saying on the Freakopotamus podcast, where this album is special to me in one way is like I said, this was out before my daughter was born, and then shortly after, I was still, bumping this. So all of 2000 was bumping this particular album. The second thing was my son, because again, I said with the track "Send It On," that was written. D'Angelo, Angie Stone co-authored that, and it's a loving tribute to their son. This is one of these songs like Reasons and Every Breath You Take, where you think it's just this simple love song, and it's like, nope, it's about something much, 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 much deeper than that. It's like, you guys are playing this at weddings. This would be different because it's about family. So yeah, this one I would say more so than Reasons, more so than Every Breath You Take. Send It On is probably better qualified to play at a wedding than those other two, but it's still a much deeper meaning. To which I think, like I said, this was in heavy rotation. So I think when, my son would be in the car when I would have this in heavy rotation. And it was at, that time, he's like, I like that. That's Send It On. What's wrong is that? That's Send It On. And it's like, oh, okay, I, like that. Like I said, that age, I think, around that age, Bone Thugs and Harmony, anything on No Limit, I think whatever Cash Money too, that was coming around too. And then there was one more. I forget what the other one was, but that was his lane. So when he would discover things like Purple Rain and Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, and if he gravitated towards Send It On, and it's like, yes, like, yes. All right, it's like the saga will continue, the history will be passed down to the next generation. So cool, so there's that. Like I said, the sample of, not a sample, but an interpolation of Sea of Tranquility by Kool and the Gang. Go seek out the original. That's on their very, very first album. So before Hollywood Swinging, before Jungle Boogie, before Summer Madness, before all of that, there's that first album. And I mean, there's some gems. They had it from day one. It's just it took to those tracks becoming hits that the rest of the world was catching on to it. But yeah, definitely check that first album out. But yeah, the homages to the greats are all over this album. Track Africa, which is one of my favorites. Like I said, during those jam sessions, playing entire catalogs of artists and, picking up an element that, they could gravitate towards. The song called I Wonder You, which is on the Parade album. I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. They picked up on that beat and was like, okay, well, I like the drums on that. So they kind of figured out how to get that drum sound, and that's how Africa was born. They wrote Africa around that. My all-time favorite, Devil's Pie, is on this. Originally, that was on the Belly soundtrack, and I remember watching that movie in the theater, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of people love that soundtrack as a whole, but my only real memory of that film, for me, is Devil's Pie. And its place, it's, to me, although, it's one of those things I wish that D'Angelo was in a position to have done the entire soundtrack. That way, this movie probably would have been mentioned in the same breath as like Superfly. If you had D'Angelo do the entire track and do what Curtis Mayfield did with Superfly, which is the soundtrack of Superfly really elevates that movie. You take that soundtrack out, it's not that great of a film, you know. But the way that the music is utilized in that as a counterpoint to the whole glamorization of what's going on. It's an anti-hero story, but like I said, the music elevates that movie, and I think its place in history. Belly could have been that same film. I think if there was a singular voice on the soundtrack, but that was at the point where soundtracks were this big thing of, you know, you had to have 20 different artists, you know, everybody had to have a song, you know, and that lost that art of, as far as black films and a lot of other mainstream films too, you had to have these various artists to sell the soundtrack, you know, where, you know, really, you know, it was Isaac Hayes, that singular vision on Shaft, Curtis Mayfield, that singular vision on Superfly, you know, Bobby Womack, Across 110th Street, Marvin Gaye, Trouble Man, all of those, you know, that singular vision, I think, helps elevate the narrative of the film, where you got these various artists, some songs are better than others, and they don't work as a whole cohesively. And then a lot of times too, those type of soundtracks usually had artists, the song's not even in the film like that. But I'm kind of digressing from Devil's Pie for a minute. But the way that was utilized, it was utilized the same way as Pusher Man was utilized in Superfly, where you have this juxtaposition of, you know, how the flow of drugs, you know, are done by the narrative in that song. Devil's Pie has a similar montage, and it's about, you know, just how this crew is building their empire. You know, that montage of, you know, this one step here, this next step here, and the way that this song flows. And props to DJ Premier, because one of my favorite hip hop producers, by the way, you know, is time to eat. You know, this is how it be in this everlasting game. You know, that is the track, and you know, D'Angelo's lyrics too. You know, I think it really elevated that movie, and I wish that he could have had a singular voice for the entire soundtrack. But like I said, I don't know, you know, if that was ever thought, or it was just like, hey, we need a song for the film. I don't know, but that's just how I think that movie would have been a lot better if there was a singular narrative, because I think he would have been able to really take a lot of key scenes and come up with some very incredible lyrics and a great sound to match the mood of those scenes a lot better. On that, Left and Right is another favorite of mine. The Line is a very motivational song for me that I still play to this day. If I'm hitting a slump anywhere with anything, I've got like a little playlist of different songs, you know, that kind of, The One by Digital Underground is one of those that I play just for motivation. But The Line by D'Angelo is on that same playlist as well. And, you know, that's one that really, like I said, if I'm in a slump, that's the one. Yep. Okay, gonna do this. We're gonna put this on the line. Like I said, Send It On, Chicken Grease, One More Again. You know, the thing with D'Angelo's albums is there's not one track where I skip. Now, sometimes I, you know, kind of in the mood to like, oh, let me play this suite of songs here. I don't know. I really haven't shuffled anything. It's usually I take like whatever playlist that Apple Music has already curated, and I kind of just shuffle that. But usually when I go for whether it's Brown Sugar, Voodoo, Black Messiah, then it's beginning to end most times, or sometimes it's like, okay, I'm just in the mood to hear this first half of songs or the second half of songs and stuff. But yeah, I never really skip. Not at all. The Let's see, Great Day in the Morning. I used to play that a lot. I haven't played that in a while. Feel Like Making Love, which is a cover of Roberta Flack's song. I haven't played that in a while either. Untitled, the classic and the source of a lot of controversy. Great homage to the great Prince ballads ever. The video, which, they kind of coaxed him into doing the video. We all know about the video, and I kind of get it, and there's an interview with Tavis Smiley where it's like, it wasn't the attention that was the problem. It was the attention during the concert that was the problem to me. I think that if they had just done a video kind of a la, I think the video that comes to mind for me is Prince with Call My Name, which is probably one of my favorite Prince ballads of all time, and one of my favorite Prince videos of all time. I think if they went with something a little bit more sensual, not over the top, maybe have a little, not necessarily a story, but just kind of some moments, and I guess that might have been repetitive of some of the videos from Brown Sugar. Well, repetitive of the Lady video, but I think that song still would have sold if you had some kind of, some other element instead of the shock value with it. Because like I said, it wasn't so much the attention, he's a brother just like all of us. It's like, hey, we don't mind that attention. But the thing was, because he was such a student of the craft, the way that they crafted the live show, which again was an homage to Parliament Funkadelic, 80s Prince era concerts. What is that? I've read, things like, for reference, if you check out, I think it's from that old TV series Soul, I think, where it was a whole hour of Al Green on that show. You can find the clip. He's in the plaid suit with the turtleneck. And the clip I saw, it's one of my favorite clips. I haven't watched the whole thing in its entirety, but my favorite of that whole performance is when he does "Tired of Being Alone" on that, and you watch his mannerisms, that command. The audience is a little refined because it's a TV show. It's kind of, that show was kind of like, it was very sophisticated. Folks came on there and they read their poetry, or you had like Maya Angelou on the show, and you had, it was, pre That's the Way of the World, Earth, Wind and Fire on the show. So it was that kind of a, that audience. It was like they were hip, everybody's afroed out and everything, but it was that sort of thing, like, yes, that was great. It was great. But like, if there's actual concert footage, when Al Green does these moves, like where he's just kind of, he takes that pause just at the right time in the song, and, he steps back from the mic, he kind of walks away from the mic, and he comes back. I'm so tired of being alone, and he comes back with that, and just little things, and he's like, hey, baby, stepping back from the mic. Those are the things when D'Angelo and Questlove and all of the Soulquarians were in Electric Lady, and they would spend those first 2 to 4 hours watching these bootleg videos. Those were the notes they were taking. Like, okay, well, when James Brown does this with the mic, that's what I'm going to do. When Al Green takes that pause, that's what I'm going to do. When he hits that high note, I'm gonna lean back this way. They put so much time and effort and care into a concert, which is something that probably very few, Prince was still doing it. Public Enemy still puts that time and care and attention into a concert. Nobody else was putting that type of care into a show. And I know you probably been to some shows and was like, yeah, if so-and-so took their shirt off at the right time, you screamed at the part where you were supposed to scream, somebody, bum shaking, over here, whatever, you scream where you're supposed to scream or whatever, or that's what you've come to expect. But when you got to rely, when you have actual talent and skill as a musician and a performer and a singer, then that concert is just as much of an art form, as just as much of a performance piece as the thought and care put into an album. I'm not talking about I got computerized beats too, I'm gonna have to get a real drum set one of these days, but it's more than that. It's definitely more than just that program beat, and everybody in the studio, okay, that's cool, but you got to fill an album. You got to fill several albums because you want longevity in your career. So while you got this, then maybe one of those tracks or the next album, you got to do this, or something. Or, stop all that damn riffing. I blame Star Search for starting that mess. And I blame American Idol and The Voice for perpetuating it. Because it's like, yeah, there's a feeling that comes and there's a certain timing that comes. But unfortunately, too, you also don't have a lot of lyrics these days where you have the opportunity. This is the difference with great singers. Great singers sell you the song. That's why, like, Frank Sinatra is so effective. The Mills Brothers, I can't think of the lead singer, but it's the one that Dean Martin has patterned his entire career after. Sammy Davis, Billie Holiday, Dinah Washington, Nancy Wilson. The ability to sell the story of the song. Mary J. Blige has that ability too. This is just my personal opinion, not the absolute greatest voice. You stick her next to Shaka and Aretha and Whitney and Mariah, then no, there's no contest. But her greatest strength is her ability to sell that. If it's a song about pain, she can sell that pain. She knows how to interpret a song. And again, that's what great singers do, is the ability to sell you that song. And again, I'm digressing, but to put that type of care into your performance like that, and then you come out, you prepared for this, you want this show to be mentioned just like a Prince show. You want this show because it's like, yeah, I was watching the DVD that comes with this 1999 box set. It's like, Prince wanted that from the beginning, but Prince also, I think especially post Dirty Mind had already proved that he was the greatest musician on earth, where D'Angelo just had the one album prior to Voodoo. So you really didn't get to see that. You just saw him early on, those first concerts, just him at the keyboard at first. But that in-depth study in preparation for Voodoo, and Voodoo being that next level, that was definitely one where, I think if he had 2 or 3 more albums to prepare, then by the time you got to Voodoo and by the time you got to do a video like Untitled, I think the audience would have been better prepared, because it's really that the audience, or a certain segment of the audience, I should say, just saw that video and that's all that they saw. They didn't realize this is the next Prince. They didn't realize this was the next Marvin Gaye. They didn't realize this was the next, whatever. And, you look at where Marvin was at the end of his career, crack paranoia, trying to compete with Prince, and just how much of a train wreck those final shows of that tour was, where it went from just unbuttoning the shirt to full dress down. And it's like, 40-year-old dude dressed down. Nah, that's not going to work. D'Angelo was forward thinking and probably was aware of that too, and was preparing for the longevity. Because it's like, nah, I ain't going to be doing this when I'm 40, 50 years old. Nah, that ain't going to work. Nah, I'm going to be a musician. You saw Prince stop doing that at at 40. It's like, 30, Love Sexy album cover, which, that's another video for another day. In fact, I did do a video about how that probably wrecked his momentum, just that album cover alone. But when you are a bona fide musician, and Prince knows this, Stevie knew it, when you are that musician, you're not relying on those tricks. You're not relying on those gimmicks. Like I said, I'm kind of off the top of the dome, but like what's happened with Nelly Furtado recently, there wasn't nothing wrong with that girl. It wasn't, it's like, so she didn't look like 20 years ago, but that's the thing, when it started off with the gimmicks, you see, like with where Aretha was at one point, it's like, it didn't matter what Aretha looked like at any age, it's like she came out and she was a diva first and foremost. Number two, that first note, you ain't caring. It's like, that's Aretha, that's that, and that's the lesson. Any bona fide, budding musicians, singers, whatever, it's about longevity. And like Rapping Forte said too, silly is called versatility. That's why I'm gonna be around. That's what he was planning for, was that. And it did some stuff to him. It did some stuff to his brain. It made him insecure. And like I said, when you're in the Star Wars and all that, comic books and Yoda and calling yourself Luke Skywalker, making Questlove Chewbacca, and Q-Tip's Han Solo and all of that, it's, I've been there. It's a point where, like I said, you figure it out. You create something that's you and that's uniquely you. And it's like, I can sit here, my whole, it's like, I read comic books. Yeah, and and we going out of what? It's like, that's, it's a part of who I am. It's like, I ain't changing because, okay, then go chase after that image. Go after that image. Good luck to you. I'm going to do my thing over here. So, I get it. But like I said, when you're dealing with fame, fortune, folks coming at you, record companies coming at you, the fans coming at you, all these different people, and it's not in a good way, then that insecurity sets in, that pressure sets in, you kind of create some of your own demons, and, sometimes you succumb to those. And, that's why dude was kind of underground or missing in action for about 12 some odd years. But, not going to dive into that. A lot of that is online. A lot of that's common knowledge. But, he did get himself together. He got himself healed and got himself back in the studio. And like I said, after 12-year absence, it was, wasn't all doom and gloom. He was already a good musician on multi-instruments, but he decided like, okay, I'm the virtuoso on the keyboards, but you know what? My heroes, they had that guitar. So he got deeper into his guitar playing, got deeper into that, and started listening, like I said, I'm started listening to some Funkadelic now. I'm going to take some Prince Dirty Mind era style playing, and, Russell Elevate, my engineer, he's telling me more about the Beatles. He's telling me more about Led Zeppelin. He's telling me about Frank Zappa. He's telling me about, Oh, I only know Purple Haze from Jimmy. Oh, I haven't heard this Jimmy before. Okay, so there's that, and came back. And in the meanwhile, there's a lot of things that have been rewinding the clock back to 1964, 1955, 1940, 1840. There's a lot of that that's repeating, folks trying to repeat that mess these days for whatever reason. Like I said, well, let's put it this way. Racism is a cancer. It's a disease. It is based on no sense of logic whatsoever. It's just, well, if there is logic, fear. Plain fear. And that's fear of what one doesn't understand. But that makes it just as ignorant and illogical. And when you got those three things in the mix, stupidly tragic stuff happens, like that. And we're trying to progress to a society to where that is no longer the case. We've made some strides, but get knocked a few steps back. Like I say, some folks, out of that fear and insecurity, doesn't matter how many billions they got, they still scared, So it's like that stuff is still being perpetuated and stuff. So not only does he come back again, third time around, keeping it organic, keeping it real. The lyrics now, some of the songs in here, like the charade, all we wanted was a chance to talk, and we still getting outlined in chalk. Those, prayer, till it's done. So you have 1,000 deaths. You have those tracks which have some substance, and tracks that will not be dated. I think he was that clever. You have something like a John Lennon's "Give Peace a Chance," which is, always going to stand the test of time. And again, as long as stupid stuff like what's going on in this world today keeps happening, that song is still relevant. Imagine stands the test of time like that. But you got a lot of, quote unquote protest songs or conscious songs that really do date themselves. But when you have something that endures, like a lot of Curtis Mayfield stuff, it endures. Like early Bob Dylan, that stuff endures. And nobody's doing that. And if they are, like I said, they're in the abyss of whatever streaming service. They're in the abyss of YouTube, and they only have a certain number for following, and it's not mainstream. But because you had that 1-2 punch of Brown Sugar and Voodoo, this was so eagerly awaited, and it was so embraced, and it was so next level. I would say out of the three, I know it's a cliche, these two are about my favorites, but I think I would say this one is definitely, I want to say it's number one for me, where this was number one for a long time. But yeah, I say this is number one, and this was number one for a long time till this one came along. This one, I just started revisiting since October 14th. I started kind of revisiting this more and just reminded how much of a classic this is. But, what's ironic, too, is, you had Jimi Hendrix that was only around for 3 official albums, 4 if you count Band of Gypsies, which is a live album. But that was, 90 years of living packed in a short 27 with that. But it's just something eerily, not the way that it came, but just the fact that 3 albums, even though they're like decades apart, I don't know, there's still so much of Jimmy that we, their estate does an excellent job at, keeping it alive since they were able to regain ownership in 1996. Um, I'm hoping. I know D'Angelo was working on a final album. Uh, don't know. According to Questlove, a lot of times, he's D'Angelo's one of those like Dr. Dre, like Stevie Wonder, where they're so meticulous on a record. It may already be perfect, but they're gonna hold on to it just to have that. Just like, okay, I gotta tweak that one note on that one drum beat right there. Okay, now I need to layer one more background vocal here. No, I gotta do. Nope, it's perfect. Like a documentary on Tribe Called Quest where it's like, yeah, with Q-Tip. No, you gotta give me that album. Give it here. No, I'm putting it out right now. Putting it out. Yeah, I'm sure that we're gonna have a lot to look forward to. Just like with Prince, I'm kind of hoping D'Angelo had his affairs in order. Not sure, that's two or three different record companies for each one of those albums. I don't know the state of him owning his masters. But like I said, there's so much material between Brown Sugar and Voodoo. So much material, I'm sure, between Voodoo and Black Messiah. The follow-up to Black Messiah was supposed to have been a couple of years ago. We didn't see it. So, like I said, not sure what stage that's in. Like I said, again, like Jimi Hendrix, who was working on an album at the time of his passing. That did come out posthumously. First was The Cry of Love. That was the earliest, like I think around 1971. I think that came out. But it had since been kind of reimagined twice. The first was First Rays of the New Rising Sun, which came out after his original albums were remastered. So they were calling that sort of like the definitive final album. The Electric Lady box set, when you buy that, the Blu-ray that comes with it has the actual sequence as Jimmy was planning it, because originally it was supposed to be like a 2-album set. And he did have a handwritten track list to that. So on the Blu-ray, you'll get that sequence, or how that album was meant to be sequenced, the final album. So you get to hear it there. So it's been reimagined twice since the original Cry of Love in '71. So I'm sure we're probably going to get something like that with D'Angelo. Like I said, hoping the proper people are in charge of his now estate. And I'm hoping Questlove and Russell will be the curators of the music. I think that's the one thing that I'm sad that Prince doesn't have. I am happy that they do have a Chris James to do the Dolby Atmos stuff. The mastering or remastering is done at Bernie Grubman's, which is a very reputable mastering institution's been around for decades. That type of thing. But but when you have like a Giles Martin, like with the Beatles stuff, or Paul Hicks, which is in the solo case of John Paul and Ringo, their solo material. You have a Paul Hicks for that stuff. Like I said, for Prince, Chris James, for the Dolby Atmos stuff. A dedicated engineer. Like I said, Prince had so many, so there's not one I could think of that you could bring back. But like a Chris James, get that one I'm thinking of one. I can't think of his name right now. That is did the engineering for Prince's final tour. That one. I think he would be a good choice to, as far as like the entire catalog and stuff like that. But yeah, Russell Elevato for D'Angelo, Questlove for D'Angelo. I think those two should be the curators. If there's anything that needs any type of instrumental overdubs, you got the Vanguard that's there. So I didn't mean to go this long and this deep. Just want to say a few things off the top of the dome. What else did I want to talk about? That, like I said, the piece on Questlove was moving. A lot of chatter online is equally as moved as I was moved by that. If you had a chance to check it out, Rolling Stone is the copy you can read. Go on Questlove's Instagram. He does a reading of it on Instagram. It's in 2 parts. So you could check that out. I note also too, I don't think that this is the time or the place. Since that has come out, a lot of people have taken his comment about a certain Michael Jackson song as an excuse. One of two things: diehard fanatics, I'm not going to say fans, but fanatics of Michael Jackson, because there's a difference. There's fans of Michael Jackson. There's also fans of the Jackson 5, the Jacksons, and that's those of us that have been there since day one and has been there the entire ride. And there are people that were probably born after 1984 or didn't grow up where we grew up. So, that is like, oh, hey, there he's tearing down Michael Jackson. Oh, that song isn't terrible. And all of this. Like I said, number one, this is not the time or place. Man was commenting about his best friend. His best friend who has just left this plane of existence. And, in trying to find the right words, he didn't know it's an explanation. He could have mourned privately. But, he chose to do that because we were all concerned. We were all worried. Like I said, because we know the closeness. We've read all the interviews. We've seen his comments, his tweets, his blogs, his video, his interviews. We've seen it and read it and heard it all about the closeness. We've seen a documentary on D'Angelo, Devil's Pie, which I'm glad is now kind of circulating to where you can watch that now. But before his health took the turn that it did, Questlove was worried that D'Angelo wasn't going to be on this plane of existence because of the struggles he was going through between Voodoo and Black Messiah. And that road back. So this ain't the time or place for anybody to be making some ignorant ass comments over a dumbass song. So, and here's the thing. Like I said, Michael Jackson fan, really Jackson 5. Yeah, Michael was the star. Michael was the lead singer of that. But the Jackson 5 was a phenomenon that we as black folks had never seen. While most folks had their little Davy Jones, the David Cassidys, the Donny Osmonds, Leif Garrett's, they had little teen idols for days. We had people to look up to. Yeah, we had Stevie Wonder. We had Marvin Gaye. We had Temptations, but they were grown men. We had Diana Ross or whoever. They were grown women. They were grown ups. It's like, yeah, we looked up to them. Yeah, we loved, the music on the radio. Sly and the Family Stone, grown folks. We loved that music. Yeah. There had never been a phenomenon like the Jackson 5, not since Frankie Lyman, for black folks. And probably before that, people forget Sammy Davis Jr. was a child star. So we had, like I say, for all you Davy Jones, David Cassidy, Donny Osmond, Leif Garrett, Sean Cassidy, y'all pulling these cats out the woodwork every single week for y'all, but we had the Jackson 5. That was a phenomenon that we have, it's been imitated but never duplicated. Anybody that was like the next Jackson 5, they were here one record and gone next. So this was a group that had longevity and versatility. So we were there from the beginning for that. And this wasn't like it was just an organically black thing. And no, they came out the box day one and captured the. So, they were able to capture the globe, the entire planet. Well, no, let's start here in R&B and cross over. No, they crossed everybody over to them. That. And not going to rehash the entire Jackson's career or Michael's entire career, but like I said, there's a lot of us that were there from the very beginning. And the song in question, which is called Morphine, which is on a remix album that Michael probably wasn't too keen on putting out, but it's got some gems on it. And it wasn't a major seller because it was a remix album. Again, you try to correct some folks on the internet and they want to, it sold all these copies all over the world. And still wasn't nobody thinking about this damn track till Questlove brought it up. So I just get off of that right there. But the thing is, like I said, number one, this is not the time and place for that. Like I say, you dealing with somebody that's grieving and trying to process their grief. Number two, acting like y'all ain't got, like, number one, probably because if you don't have a best friend, that's probably the problem right there. That's probably the sad truth right there. But the thing is, who hasn't had inside jokes with their best friends? I got tape. We were trying to write a damn song. It breaks off into hysterics because we, instead of, it's kind of a remix to a song that we originally, in fact, a remix to the very first song we ever wrote. And, we trying to figure out what to do with this, where to go with it. We start breaking into hysterics, while he's quoting Eazy-E. I can't remember what I'm quoting on there, but we sound really ridiculous doing it and we cracking the hell up. Now, are we making fun of Eazy-E? Are we making fun of hip hop? Nope. Because that was the late 80s. That's where we were. That was our lane. So, if anybody hearing it would think this is the corniest shit ever, but play that tape back, it is damn funny. So getting back to this, the song is called Morphine, and at the 2:37 mark of the song takes a weird turn. Michael Jackson, I think, is a very excellent songwriter. I think his instincts are on point. Whatever producer he's working with, their instincts are on point. This particular track has a very questionable choice at the bridge, like you said, and it does take this ridiculous left turn. And I'm sorry, the shit's funny as hell. I'm sorry. I was like, damn, I'm sorry. It's hilarious. Now, is it a bad song? No. Is it a great song? No. Is it Michael Jackson's best song? No. Were people talking about this song since 2009? No, let's put it this way. In 1996, 97, whenever this came out, were people checking for this song? Nope. Anytime I hear a conversation about Michael Jackson, number one, it's Thriller. Number two, it's Bad. Number three, it's anything off of Dangerous. Number four, it's anything off of History. Number five, it's anything off of Invincible. It's those. I hear people talk about, deep cut album tracks off of those albums that weren't singles, that weren't hits, any one of those 5 albums. I hear chatter all day, every day since 2009 about every single song. Nobody mentions Blood on the Dance Floor. Nobody mentions that album. The EP, remix, whatever you want to call it. Somebody put it out. Whether Michael, I don't think he wanted to put it out. even that, like, he put out Ghosts, and really nobody saw that until, really only people that knew about it were the people that were the diehard Michael Jackson fans. Let's see, when did I know about it? I know somebody that made me a copy of it, and that was about 2004. So that was my first time seeing even Ghosts. But, and like I said, I wasn't checking for it. It dropped, it went lead, and so this, look, we talking about Michael Jackson, the person that was so obsessed with Top and Thriller, which is a once in a lifetime event. I don't give a damn who you are. That was a once in a lifetime achievement for that. Because if it was that easy, Bad should have topped it. Dangerous should have topped it. Invincible should have topped it. History should have topped it. So I don't want to hear about sales, because in Michael Jackson world, whatever you think is sold, that's still a damn flop compared to what Thriller and even Bad did, really. In Michael Jackson world, that's a flop. To you and me, yeah, I'm retiring off of that. I'm retiring off of that. But, like I said, it was a moving tribute. And, I gotta, I don't want to get too deep in the forest with this one, but like I said, we all have, or most of us have, or most of us should be grateful. You have somebody that, whether you grew up with them or whether y'all just met yesterday, to be able to have those inside jokes, that inside baseball. And us as musicians or any type of creative, we're inside baseball all day, every day. We're Monday morning quarterbacks all day, every day. We have conversations that, I'm sorry, you may be fans of whoever, but when you sitting next to two musicians having a conversation, you think we're talking an alien language, and you know it. You know it. You absolutely know it, so don't act like, and like I said, whatever it is that you're inside baseball about, a Monday morning quarterback about, that's the beauty of having a best friend to be those things with. Because that's somebody that gets your jokes. That's somebody that, I'm going to end it on this. When, growing up, like Stevie Wonder was by himself. Sly and the Family Stone is in the name. It was more like a family than, a group. Earth, Wind, and Fire was like 100 dudes to me, Commodores were like 100 dudes to me. Ohio Players was like 75. It was like they were a band. Like when you look at an orchestra, you're not like, oh man, Benny so and so, the cello player. That's the, or Hank and Sylvia. The celloist and the violin player. They. You're not looking at them individually like that, unless, like I said, you're that inside baseball about it. But I think for me, starting with the Beatles, and I think it really didn't click, or like as a kid, you're not thinking about these things because you're a kid, you're not that cosmically aware as a kid, but it was just something about that dynamic, or even watching something as simple as the Monkees as a kid. It was just something about that dynamic. Everybody's running around and jumping around and being silly and having fun. And it looked like, damn, they having a lot of fun. So watching something like A Hard Day's Night later, when that would come on late night, Saturday night TV back in the day, taking notice of that film, it was just like, damn, these cats are having fun. I want to have fun like that. I might have been lucky to have 1-2 friends as a kid, but like I said, that was something And I don't think it really hasn't clicked except in the hindsight. But I would say by the time I got to something like The Time, it was starting to gel. Like I was starting to figure this out. Like, okay, they're musicians, but they're having a whole hell of a lot of fun. There's a certain thing, and it's just with that group. You know, it's kind of like if you take any one person out of that group, the whole structure just seems to fall apart. And I think it kind of clicked, you know, being a musician. And it's kind of like, oh, well, this is my best friend. He writes songs. Hey, he plays keyboards. Hey, you know, it's like, you know, we listen to the same records. And it's like, oh, okay, we got that thing, where it's like, I love football. I love basketball. I probably don't love basketball as much anymore. This whole load management thing is getting on my nerves. But, I still enjoy watching football and can have a conversation about either one of the two, and some baseball. I can have a conversation all day, every day. And I remember watching something, the Beatles, the touring documentary, and Paul put this brilliantly as I'm about to put this now. It's like, yeah, in my case, talking football, basketball, or whatever, like I can have that conversation all day, every day. But, it's that part when you go, whatever it is, oh, I read this comic book yesterday, or I wrote this song yesterday, and people just kind of, okay, that's nice, whatever. But when you got that other songwriter that's across the table from you, then it's like, I wrote this song today, it's like, oh, you did, me too, or I heard this D'Angelo, this D'Angelo record is great. Yeah, word. Yeah, that is great. Hey, check out this cat named Ben Harper, though. Oh, okay. Yeah. Kind of like that, too, Or it's, having that dynamic. And then, as far back as 86, and then fast forward 2 years, moving to California, two more cats on that same level. Sign of the Times, movie theater. I was there with who I was with. And PC, you've seen him on the show quite a number of times. It was there too, and didn't know each other then, but it was like this thing of, when you went to see that Sign of the Times movie, just like if a movie was good back in those days, you got to stay and see it twice, you just don't leave the theater and come back. Otherwise, you'd have to buy an extra ticket. But if you just sat there, nobody would kick you out in those days. You just sit like, okay, I'm going to watch this movie again. It's like, that was that damn good. And that was the thing with the Sign of the Times movie. And I was, at the time, I was living on the University of San Francisco campus at the time. And like I said, during kind of like the break in between showings, this caddy comes up. He's like, hey, you go to University of San Francisco? I was like, yeah, well, I stay on the dorms. I really go to the academy of our college. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I go to USF too. It's like, oh, see Sign of the Times Prince? Yeah, cool, all right. And then fast forward a few days later, I'm coming across the campus. Cat catches me. He's like, hey, hey, by the way, you play an instrument? I was like, yeah, I play a little rhythm guitar or something. Hey, I got a band, That's when it clicked. Like I said, it's group dynamics. Like I say, people, I feel sorry for people that see, and it's a lot of times it's inevitable if you have a band where the members have passed away and you got all these replacements. It's kind of sad that you don't get to experience the original members in real time like that. But group dynamics, like the Beatles, classic Temptations lineup. Like I said, even something as simple as the Monkees, but definitely the Time. Definitely the Time. That group dynamics, that thing of where you have a certain number of individuals, whether it's 4 or 7, to where, like I said, you take any one individual out of that equation, it doesn't work. Like I said, when, there's a significant difference of seeing the classic lineup with the Temptations and what is looked at as the Temptations now. Like I said, I know Otis Williams has to keep a roof over his head and pay his bills, and he has to keep eating, and he has to work with what he's got, with all these, yeah. And there are people that don't know any better, that go scream at the Temptations when whoever is singing My Girl at the moment, because it's like they're just paying for the memories, or they're just paying, like I said, if you don't know any better, paying for the sake of, I got to see the Temptations. Or, a lot of these aging stars now where their voices aren't what they used to be now, and people just going because they're like, oh, I got to see this person. And there's a fundamental difference in that. But like I said, that magic, that chemistry, when, like I said, you have individuals and you bond for that one mission, that common goal where it's like, four of us, we got the same records. Or even if we didn't all have the same records, one person mentions one artist, we know exactly what they're talking about. We know exactly what album they're talking about. And, like I said, it doesn't even have to be that. You don't even have to be a musician to have that dynamic. Like I said, each and every one of us, most of us watching that show, should have that person or persons in that dynamic. Whether it's a spouse, whether it's a best friend, whether it's whatever. That is magic. That is one of the precious things that being on this earth is all about. And something that we need to cling on to, because like I said, this shit out here is ridiculous. It is absolutely and utterly, totally ridiculous. All of it. And like I said, all of it is just not even racially motivated. It's, class dynamics, or class, caste, whatever you want to call it. Us versus them, rich versus, whatever you want to call it, all this stuff. But I would say, if anything is, you have that dynamic, you hold on to it, just hold on to it. All the inside jokes, all the inside baseball, you hold on to that dynamic, or you hold on to the memory of that dynamic, because like I said, if you don't have it, and like I said, don't have it, whether you lost it or longing for it, that's one thing. But folks on there, and if you don't have it and you trashing somebody over a preference of what Prince era is the best, or you trashing somebody over a Michael Jackson song that, maybe two diehard fans give a damn rat's ass about, then, in a time of them, like I said, expressing their grief, then there's something seriously lacking. And, but like I say, there's no money to be made. There's no honor, there's no glory, and there's no money to be made in trashing somebody. All that's doing is taking 2 seconds away from you coming up with an idea for you living your best life. And if you sit there and say, oh, I got money, I got this, I got that, then you ain't making enough of it, because you wasting precious energy talking about somebody over nothing like that. And money can be fleeting. If you ain't properly knowing how to invest and trade, then no. No, that money you think you got, it's going to go away just like that, because you wasting precious energy over nothing. You got money, comforts of whatever, good family around you, good friends around you. Then what Questlove talking about ain't got nothing to do with what you doing. Let the man grieve, because like I said, that was his best friend. Wasn't our best friend. These were our best friends. The human being, Michael D'Angelo Archer, was a human being that was put here to share his God-given gifts to the rest of the planet. So these albums could be our best friends when we need them to be. Just like Prince, just like Stevie, just like the Beatles, just like Hendrix, just like Frank Zappa, just like all of them. Or as Marvin Gaye, I'm going to end it with Marvin Gaye, because D'Angelo was the one, that Marvin Gaye was his go-to. It wasn't just Prince, but it was something that D'Angelo was drawn to with Marvin Gaye. So I'm going to end this episode with a quote that should keep all of this in perspective. And just remember that art is subjective, and, songs, like I said, they have a personal connection. If it's personal to you, then don't, if somebody doesn't like it, don't let it hurt your feelings. So I'm going to end it on this quote that's going to punctuate all of that. The artist, this is Marvin Gaye, and it's from the song Life is for Learning. The artist pays the price, so you don't have to pay. If you only listen to what they have to say. I can quote those whole lyrics, but that's the main point that I'm going to end this episode on. And I'm going to take a deeper dive on each of those albums. Probably like with Prince, we're probably going to do wish lists on what we would like to see from the estate and those type of things. That's going to be, way down the road. But, probably just kind of reflecting on the history of these albums. I was going to talk, I'll probably just do a separate episode. There was, somebody had written a book. It's only on Kindle. It's definitely Kindle Unlimited. I'm going to give my thoughts about that because it dropped like 2 days after D'Angelo's passing. I'm going to do an episode about that another day. And kind of give because I haven't read it fully. I kind of thumbed through it, and I do have some concerning thoughts about this book. But that, again, another time for another day. But just remember, the artist pays the price, so you don't have to pay. If you only listen to what they have to say. So, Michael D'Angelo Archer, I keep calling him Arthur. But D'Angelo, rest in peace, brother. Thank you for so much great music. Thank you for inspiring. Like I said, this is like The Last Jedi. And just like The Last Jedi, I'm sure that there will be future Jedis to come. But for now, we've lost one of the last great ones. So, peace.